Alright, boys and girls and non-binary friends, it's been a while since I've pissed anyone off, and it's high time we did that, especially regarding this particular topic, which I know is a very contentious topic. But I don't shy away from this sort of stuff, so let's go ahead and jump into this. I'm gonna give you the background of what inspired this particular episode. You see, during Second Life's 23rd birthday celebration, I was walking around when I saw that one of the exhibits comprised of nothing but AI art. Slop. And it was very obviously AI art. So I was curious because I was also kind of a little bit insulted. It's silly in a way when you think about it, because the exhibit featured a great deal of Alice in Wonderland imagery, and as you know, as someone whose persona is the Cheshire Cat, I have a very, very close identification with the material. So I looked up who put this exhibit together, and I was aghast to find out that it was a group, an art collective in Second Life. So I messaged the creator of the exhibit, and I rightfully expressed my disappointment and, quite frankly, my disgust at finding that such an exhibit existed in the name of an art collective. Like, did not a single member of that collective reduce or produce anything outside of ChatGPT that could be shown as part of the exhibit for Second Life's 23rd birthday? It was just... Here are pictures of it. So, as I mentioned, I pretty much expressed my disappointment, and we had a contentious encounter. The typical apologia for AI art was flaunted, and I shot it down. But, as you know, I'm never afraid of expressing my mind, especially when it comes to this particular topic. Later on, though, I found out that this creator was essentially going around in Second Life and telling people that I had attacked her for her disability, and that I had been attacking a disabled person. And this made me think, because it was puzzling. At no point did I know that they had a disability when I first approached them, and the disability never came up during our argument. So I looked into this person's profile, and I found some articles that this person wrote in which they make the argument that has been floated about, that AI can assist individuals with disabilities in realizing their artistic vision. And that's when I started to realize what I was dealing with, what kind of idea I was facing. Because you see, there is that point that is being bandied about, that ChatGPT and similar large language model AIs are beneficial for individuals with disability facing difficulties in painting or writing or other creative endeavors because of the challenges posed by their disability, and so it can essentially create the art for them. And on the surface, you might say, sure, that's a viable argument. But I wasn't satisfied with that argument. And as you'll see, it falls apart when you take a closer look. As AI became prominent, I decided to study it. I realized early on that this was something that would most likely get abused by people, and that people would try to pass it off as stuff, their own writing and their own art. So I started studying the output, I started testing it, and at this point I have an internal document of my own observations in regards to, for example, the telltale signs of large language model generated text. So I have now developed, shall we say, about a 99% accuracy in identifying LLM text. And likewise, the images that are produced by large language models and similar are very, very easy to identify for me. And it has a lot of it to deal with how these images themselves are generated. But in order to be able to board this argument with the seriousness and accuracy demanded by the subject, we need to take a look at how AI art, such as it is generated, and why it all starts looking very much the same. So, step in with me, and we're going to jump into the rabbit hole, and we're going to talk about diffusion. So, these models work upon a sample rate of billions of images that have been used for the training data. And now, of course, these images have been sourced unethically. That's not something I'm going to debate anyone on. They are simply sourced unethically in the cases where you have a living artist who is not in the public domain and who has not signed any agreement nor is being compensated fairly for the use and licensing of their artwork to be used in this way for a commercial product. I will not be debating this. That is a black and white ethical question. In any case, these image generators are trained on that enormously large collection of images, and those images are paired with textual tags that are present in the web sources where those images were posted. Usually, they were posted as descriptions of those images or meta text or alt text. During the training, the system will add noise to each image until the image is no longer recognizable. It is a sea of noise. And the models learn to reverse the process by predicting what noise needs to be removed at each stage. Through each repeated example, it learns statistical relationships between the words and the visual patterns. So, for example, it learns which shapes or colors or clothing and compositions are commonly associated with the words, for example, Cheshire Cat. Then, when a user enters the prompt, the generator begins with random noise and then repeatedly, over and over, it removes predicted noise until the end result will match the visual pattern associated with the prompt with the most amount of probabilistic matching. Remember, these are probabilistic engines. So, the final image is not copied directly exactly from one single image. It is generated from those statistical relationships. There is also a process where you have additional human input, human feedback that evaluates whether the images match the prompts and which outputs are more useful or attractive or even appropriate. And these evaluations will influence later versions of the model, making certain visual styles more likely to appear. So, for example, if you ask, I want to create a CD cover with an anthropomorphic Cheshire Cat lounging upon the bare construct lines of a bench glowing in an iridescent rainbow colors floating over a sea of clouds against a midnight blue sky with stars, with a honey-colored moon rising behind the character's head, painted in the style of Maxfield Parrish, then the model will combine patterns associated with all of those words. And because the system favors patterns that have performed reliably across many examples and evaluations, the outputs often converge on very familiar design conventions. So, one thing that you need to remember is that every single choice that the model makes, it is choosing what is the most statistically safe choice to make. In other words, these image generators, they favor regularly recognized categorical conventions, so it will always fall towards what is statistically similar and statistically safe. So, now if you know anything about art, true art is anything but safe. It is all about taking risks, about radical self-expression and finding your unique voice. So, we already have a big problem here because image generation models tend to favor high probability visual patterns found across all of their training data. And so the model is pulled towards combinations that represent the statistical center of that category. And deviations appear less frequently in the data, both from the sample rate and also weeded out by human annotators. Then the model suppresses them in favor of the safer alternative. So this creates a selection pressure against anything that is visually risky, anything that is ambiguous, anything that may be seen as imperfect, or anything that even has a strong individual visual style. Which is why you see all of the samey looks in these generated images. That's why poster generation tends to orbit towards the same type of fonts. Look at these, right? So the result is not just poor design, but it's a design that is optimized for safety, for inoffensive mass popular appeal instead of any originality or exceptionality. Because again, think about this. This is a model that will go towards the average. This is where the statistically safe choices remain. That is mediocrity. So, let's think about some exceptional painters of the past, just to start with painters. Imagine, for example, Paul Cézanne, or imagine Klimt, for example, or let's say Picasso during his Cubist period. All of these incredibly risky artists, even the school of Fauvism, which focused on outrageously colored environments and people that don't reflect reality at all, none of these things were statistically safe. None of these artistic directions were even remotely within that particular parameter. So, unless you specifically direct the model, and not only direct it, but dig your heels in and fight against the gravitational pull that is existing in the mathematics of the model, you're never going to get anywhere near any of these extremely unique styles. Instead, you will get these very default cartoons or these very, very default realistic painting styles. But if you look at each different style that you can get through the image generation models, they all look very similar. That is, each of these style samples looks like they could have been made by the same artist. Whereas, for example, you could find several realistic painters, for example, who did realistic digital paintings, and their styles were very different, very varied. And the sameness of style is one of the reasons you can always spot AI-generated art outside of that very, very faint patina that you can also see. This dusty appearance that belays some of the remnants of the noise that was used for the generation. That's actually one of the reasons you can see that occasional texture to the images. So, there is an enormous problem with this, and I'll tell you what it is. You see, art and artistic expression, these are some of the most personal and individual things that a human being can engage in. Even if you look at, for example, members of the same art school, like the Renaissance masters or the Impressionists, right? No two Impressionists quite paint the same way, and you can definitely tell a Tintoretto from a Da Vinci. There is always an individualized aspect to art that isn't replicated by another person just spontaneously. I mean, yes, you can copy artwork, and in fact, copying paintings of old masters is one way that artists learn to handle the fundamentals such as lighting, composition, balance. But once you are done learning, then you start to create your own individual style. And that style is a synthesis. It's a synthesis of many, many things, more than just a set of mathematical approximations. The shape language that you favor, you might favor more curvaceous images, you might favor angular body shapes, elongated, stylized, stocky, or short bodies. All of that, the choice of subject matter, the specific way in which a subject matter is framed and executed in the painting, all of that comes from your personality, from your background, from your experiences, from your beliefs. Even if you're not conscious of the choices that you're making when you're making that piece of art, every single one of those things is a factor in how that image is formed, and your level of skill is the kiln. But even if you're not that skilled, you still have that very individualistic spark to your artwork, even if all you can do are doodles, because you are a living human being with experiences and memories. So, think about this from this angle, from this perspective. What are we doing when we let ChatGPT or some other model create an image for us, and then we pass it off as our own, or we pass it off as part of an artistic collaboration or a statement? Once you realize everything that goes into generating that image, well, you're going to realize a couple of things. You're going to realize that that image has nothing of yours in it. Even if you wrote the prompt, even if you proposed the subject, that's all that there is that belongs to you. Let's put it this way. With an example, in the furry fandom, people commission artists all the time to bring their personas to life. Those who are capable of drawing and painting often will try to do it for themselves, but it's interesting that even those who can paint and who can draw even to very high levels will still commission other artists to illustrate their personas. Why is that? Well, I can only answer for myself as an artist. There is always something about your artwork that will always be familiar to you. There are no real surprises. So even if you are the kind of artist who is at such a high level that you can capture what you envision very well, which, by the way, this is not a magical talent that just happens or that you inherit. It's something that you build through practice and learning. Every single one of you can learn to get to that level. But even if you can capture with very, very high fidelity what you envision in your mind, you will always be curious about what else someone can bring to the table. I will give other artists my character description or the reference sheet and then just let them roll with it and see what it is that they envision when they look at my character, and all the different interpretations and the different things that each artist highlights, the composition, the design. It's always so different. It's refreshing. And that happens because each one of those artists has a very, very unique approach, a very unique style, a very individualized visual language that comes from growing into who they are as artists. Flaws and everything. But when you ask any of these models to create an image for you, you're not even commissioning an artist. You're not even giving them any money. You are essentially approaching an extraction machine, asking it to match the statistical noise that best fits your prompt and generate an image that, quite frankly, is mediocre. It is the average of the average, the median, so to speak. So anything that might have made the art exceptional or unique, just look at it. It's all probabilistic, it's all math, and it's the kind of math that doesn't actually encompass the exceptional or the unique. So even if you were, say, an artist with a disability who has to commission another artist to help complete your vision, even there at that moment, you're still a lot more genuine and more individualized than if you asked the LLMs to create an image for you, because then you at least are guaranteeing that there is the individual touch, the individual shape language, color choices, and every idiosyncratic thing that makes that artist's fingerprints unique. But if you rely simply on these machines, you're not even getting that. You're essentially feeding your idea, your prompt, that unique thing that an artist could have brought to life to the machine. And you're feeding it to the mediocre average, and in that way, you're extinguishing any chance of your art or your collaboration to have any uniqueness whatsoever. It becomes forgettable, boring. It's mid through and through. So, here is my painting for my CD cover for Small Wonders and Secret Sorrows, my album. It's not perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's very much me with my own choices and flaws. And here is a prompt-generated image of the CD description I gave you earlier. It's very slick, I'll give you that, but it doesn't have much of a personality. It looks like every other ChatGPT-generated image of an anthropomorphic character, and what's going on with that tail? But at the end of the day, though, these tech bros, these AI bros, are trying to convince you that these are the things that will help you become a better artist, that will help you bring your vision about. But that's not the case. All it does is bury your vision under sameness. And being the same is the total opposite of art. AI art and the tech bros who defend it are nothing more than engines of corporate homogeneity. Think about the reasons you like a particular artist, and I bet that 90% of the time it's not going to be, well, they draw exactly the same as this other artist, but they use zombies instead. And so, think about what happens then when you make the argument that AI art can help artists with disabilities fulfill their visions. Because we already have a problem in this society where you have people with disabilities being cast aside. In many cases, even sort of told that they need to conform to the majority, that they should not expect any accommodations. And that's a sentiment that has been growing, not coincidentally in tandem with the rise of AI. So in many ways, those who live with disabilities of one form or another are already having to struggle against being homogenized and against being punished for not being able to be part of the homogeneous mass. And they are usually not the people who decide what that looks like. And now you're making the argument that the best way to get these artists to fulfill their vision is to homogenize them, to feed them to the mass. I don't think a lot of people have really thought about this argument, but that's basically what it is proposing. And I understand, disabilities can make the task of art making arduous, sometimes even impossible, under certain conditions. There are artists who find ways, even with their disabilities, to make art in their own way, and in many cases in ways that other people couldn't possibly do, like Galen Lee.
Our love's a complex vintage wine, all rotted leaves and lemon rind. I spit you out, but now you're mine. We bit the fruit, it seemed a lie. I'll never know which way was right. Now side by side we face the night.
Or other artists who have all sorts of different things to deal with, and yet they find a way to make the art in whatever way they can. I'm going to give you a small sample of them. We begin with Henri Matisse, who, following a surgical procedure for cancer, he became wheelchair bound. That didn't stop him from pursuing his dreams of bringing his creation to the world, and he believed, in fact, that his disability gave him a new lease on life. As Henri discovered a newfound beauty around him, he started creating art out of colored paper shapes, which his assistant would help him stick down. Chalk is also another thing that he used a lot. He passed away in 1954, but some of his most famous pieces are still well known around the world, including Le Bonheur de Vivre, Bleu Nude, The Green Stripe, and Music, all of them which were created during this particular period. Then we have Paul Smith, who was born with cerebral palsy. Paul used one finger on a typewriter to create amazing works of art through his lifetime. His speech, mobility, and his fine motor skills were all impacted by palsy, but he still managed to pursue a career doing what he loved. At the young age of 11, he discovered a passion for creating typewriter art when he started playing around with a typewriter that had been thrown out by a neighbor, and he turned that simple tool into an outlet, allowing him to create things like this. And we have Neil Harbison, who was born without the ability to see color, something you think would stop an artist. But that didn't stop him, because Neil attached a special antenna to his head that enables him to hear colors, enhancing what he was capable of seeing naturally. He was even capable of seeing infrared and ultraviolet light, so he was able to turn music and images into sounds, putting a new spin on artistic creation. But we also have among the masters Michelangelo. We know him for creating the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and amazing sculptures like that of the David or La Pietà. But Michelangelo struggled with severe gout and osteoarthritis. He regularly had enormous pain using his hands, and he had trouble with very, very limited mobility. And yet still. Then we have John Babbitt. John Babbitt, who is functionally blind, making it very difficult to distinguish between light and dark and values. Yet he still managed to become the first blind muralist in the world. His blindness is a result of epilepsy. He had his first seizure at the age of 2, and he was completely blind by the age of 31. But John uses textured paint to navigate each canvas that he works on, and he creates pieces that mix impressionism with modern pop art, and his art has been sold over 120 countries in the world, and he has even appeared in print and television and on radio. On the mental health sphere, we have Yayoi Kusama, who was known for her bright and inspiring works of art. The Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama has battled mental health issues all of her life, and along with having obsessive compulsive disorders, she also experiences regular hallucinations. She turned to bright colors and repetitive shapes to take her mind into a meditative state. And since the 70s, she has voluntarily lived in a psychiatric facility. But she is one of the world's most successful artists living today. Yinka Shonibare, after contracting a rare infection at the age of 19, he was left physically disabled and relying on a wheelchair. And he's known for painting, sculptures, photography, and film projects. He likes working with Dutch wax, and some of his most famous works include The American Library, Hibiscus Rising, and Woman Shooting Cherry Blossoms. Then, of course, we have Chuck Close. Despite having severe paralysis, Chuck Close became famous for a massive-scale photorealistic and abstract portraits of himself and others. Throughout his childhood, he honed that artistic skill through private art lessons, but later in life, when he suffered from severe paralysis, he found his unique take on art. He transposed his subjects from photographs into visual data organized by gridded compositions, creating realistic, one-of-a-kind pieces. In the 80s, before we even had the mosaic filters, for example, on Photoshop. So, finding a way to make meaningful art in spite of obstacles and difficulties becomes part of the art itself. You never know, in fact, just how far you can go once you decide to face an impediment. After all, some of the greatest masters in the world were able to do what they did despite enormous constraints. Now, I'm not presumptuous enough to tell people with disabilities that they just need to get over it and do art, because there are people who are in agony, who can't do things that they used to do in the past. But that's not the point of this video. The video is to tell you that the argument that AI will help you bring your visions to life is an empty promise. All that you're doing is essentially sacrificing your vision that you could have created by collaborating with another human willing to help you to bring that to life. You're sacrificing it to the machine of mediocrity and safeness. And in a way, you're killing your art. And you're depriving the world from seeing what could have come from that. Imagine all that uniqueness sanded away by the plagiarism, statistically safe machine. But hey, let's do another example. As a composer, I am a little on the unconventional side. I have a tendency to avoid conventional harmonic functions. I like to stay within the world of tonality, but I very seldom employ the 5/1 cadential structure, for example, and I really like to swing in and out of modes instead of just using relative keys, but then I may also switch to the relative key just for shits and giggles. I enjoy a lot of counterpoint, and most pieces have a theatrical concept behind them, so AI bros get salty. Every time I argue with them, there's always the one wag who claims that my work can be easily replicated by AI, so they can certainly try. Here, we have the results of a model that was fed all of my published music and given the directive to compose something in my style, choosing a subject and theme that I might choose. So, do I need to hang my composer's quill? Let's go and take a gander. What the hell was up with that modulation, and what was happening with the harmony? What drunk orangutan wrote the voice leading, and what the hell was that sad attempt at a B section that had no cohesion whatsoever? And where was the counterpoint? The only thing that this plagiarism machine got right was the title, which was a reference to a Reynard the Fox story, which is a subject I might compose for one day. But the execution? Well, let's just say that this particular AI is begging for one for crimes against everything. Alright, I'm going to show you a work in progress. Why can't the AI recreate me? Well, like I said, my composition style is not part of a safe cookie cutter mold. I use harmony mode strategically with an emotional goal in mind, and that requires an understanding of the emotional language of music. My counterpoint tends to be guided by the notion that almost every voice should have some individual identity while also being cantabile, to have the expressive quality of song, and that's something you come to understand if you're an instrumentalist, and even more so if you're a singer. The AI can't understand any of those things. It can't understand anything. It simply goes for the most statistically safe iteration. And my music isn't statistically safe. I mean, it's not Stravinsky or John Cage, but it exists in that little curve just above the reach of what is safe. And in fact, I know that I give Schenkerian music theory analysis a migraine, and I'm fine with that. I'd rather have a unique voice, even if it's uneven, than to try to be exactly like the composers who came before me. In fact, I can tell you this. If Beethoven, when he went deaf, had decided to use an AI model to write his Ninth Symphony, it wouldn't have been the same because, once again, well, if you look at the Ninth Symphony, which Beethoven wrote when he was completely deaf, the Ninth Symphony by itself is one of the towering masterpieces of the Western classical canon, and it challenges and breaks away with so many traditions of symphonic works that had come before. It includes a choir. The woodwind writing in the second movement's trio section was very unique and progressive for 1824. It completely reversed the orchestral hierarchy. It includes soloists as if it were an opera or an oratorio, and it creates this enormous, massive thing in scope. Beethoven even rewrote Anton Schiller's poem, An die Freude. Schiller had grown to very much dislike An die Freude, the Ode to Joy. In an 1800 letter to his friend Christian Gottfried Korner, Schiller dismissed his poem as a complete failure, calling it a detached from reality and of value maybe for us two, but not for the world. Beethoven sat down, omitted more than half of Schiller's original lines, fundamentally altered the structure of the poem, rearranged the verses to create a more cohesive theme, and then added his own lines. ChatGPT and large language models can only work from what has come before, and nothing like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony had been done before.
Seine Sonnen fliegen froh, wie seine Sonnen fliegen durch des Himmels prächtigen Bahn. Laufet, Brüder, eure Bahn, laufet, Brüder, eure Bahn, freudig, wie ein Held zum Siegen, wie ein Held zum Siegen, laufet, Brüder, eure Bahn.
When Beethoven went deaf, it should have been the end of him as a composer. Composers need to hear music, right? But as Terry Pratchett once observed, deafness doesn't prevent him from hearing the music in his head. It only prevented him from hearing the distractions. As his deafness progressed, Beethoven's music became more and more introspective and more revolutionary. He stopped working within the framework of the classical period to such a degree that he shattered it and became the harbinger of the Romanticist movement. He became sort of a Janus figure, looking at the past of the classical era while also simultaneously defining the music of the future. Just like every single revolution in music and art and literature, every new school is something that hadn't been seen before. So, how are you going to create something new using a machine that only defaults to the statistical average? Don't sell yourself short. You might just be the Beethoven of your generation. In the face of difficulty, you might reach into yourself and create something that will leave the world agog. But how are you ever going to know if all you do is let something else do the work for you? You'll never know, because that's not how art is made. And who cares if it's not perfect? Frida Kahlo's artwork is not considered technically perfect by classical standards. Paralyzed after a gruesome bus accident, Frida had a mirror placed above her bed so she could paint her self-portraits as she lay paralyzed. And her style is fiercely unique and inimitable. It screams Frida with every brushstroke, and her artwork has eclipsed the work of her once famous husband and abuser, Diego Rivera. I would rather live in a world of Frida Kahlos, of artistic imperfection that is very, very human and can always get better, than a world of cold, average slickness, which is just a delusion. It's not a world where art exists. It's a world of corporate homogeneity, of pre-approved aesthetics, of commodified looks and easily marketed and packaged visual language. And let's be honest, if you are different, be it an other or disabled, that kind of world doesn't have a place for you. So why are you still feeding it? When Johann Sebastian Bach went completely blind towards the end of his life, he dictated his final pieces. Even if you can't do what you might have been able to do in the past, there is always something you can do that is yours, that is human. Stop feeding the monster that wants to eat all of us, and instead start nurturing the human, so that, as Terry Pratchett says, we can be the point where the falling angel can meet the rising ape.